imagine the scenario. You're doing really well, you're flying high, and then suddenly, whack, you're falling. You're absolutely crashing. It's scary. Well, that's the story of my guest today, Richard Tyler, who was doing absolutely brilliantly until he received a really devastating diagnosis of terminal cancer. Now, Richard has written about his progress through the few years since that diagnosis, the hard times that he's gone through, but he's written a really beautiful book looking at how that has impacted his life, and also looking at how we need to do more to support people when they're descending and not just when they're ascending. So, without any further waffling from me, here's my chat with Richard Tyler. Richard, thank you so much for joining me today. I have, honestly, I know you've got a book coming out on the 29th of June, 29th. And it is called As a Kite Falls, and it is about your journey, your descent, as you describe it, after a hugely impactful cancer diagnosis. And this is a book, I've got sort of pink bits in there, sort of reminding me of bits that I want to remind you of as we go through this. But what a gorgeous metaphor as well, as a kite falls. So, I mean, I'm really grateful to you for coming on the show to talk about this today. Tell us a little bit about the impact that your cancer diagnosis has had on you, and just tell us what that was.
Well, thank you for having me. It's lovely to be here with you. I mean, look, I knew that something was hurtling towards us in respect of my health. I knew there was a diagnosis on the way. And the closer we got to that diagnosis day, the more I sensed it wasn't going to be great news. Just cues that I picked up on from the doctor and from the hospital that it wasn't good. But nothing really could have prepared me, I think, for a diagnosis of a cancer that was so aggressive, that is actually so rare. So it's a type of blood cancer called mantle cell lymphoma. Generally, they tend to be diagnosed quite late anyway, so it was already stage 4B. I had quite a lot of B symptoms. There's only 600-700 people in the UK diagnosed with mantle cell. You can't really track down mantle cell specialists. In the US, that's really important that they have a mantle cell specialist, but in the UK, there aren't really any. So, I mean, the diagnosis, I guess, it felt as if it picked up our family and kind of tore us into little pieces and scattered us on the floor in order for us to then kind of rearrange those pieces into some semblance of order. And I will in every cell in my body remember that diagnosis coming towards me, and remembering probably 5 minutes after I got the diagnosis that I tuned out. I deferred to my wife to make some sense of what was happening, make some sense of starting chemotherapy the next day, knowing that I needed to go home and tell a 16-year-old that her dad had a cancer. I was told not to Google it because what I'd read online wouldn't be very palatable. I think I'm really lucky that healthcare, and especially with blood cancers, has evolved so much in the last few years. The prognosis now for mantle cell is better. It used to be 3 to 5 years was about it. It is better now, and but at that time I just remember going into a place of I guess barricading my life a little bit. I didn't want to speak to anyone. It was weeks before I said to anyone, I have cancer. I wasn't able to form those words. I didn't want to watch telly. I didn't want to read. I didn't want to listen to music. I sat and looked out the window for a few weeks. Pretty much that was it. Treatment started in earnest the following day. And I mean, it was brutal. You know, I have a 16-year-old daughter. I have a wife. For all of us, it was brutal. And whilst it felt as if we walked this collective path, the three of us together, experiencing similar responses to what was going on, we also all walked our own path. And I think that's really important to remember when people are in some kind of descent. As they walk their path, the people around them may walk a collective path, and they also have to be, I think, given the space and the respect to walk their own path. And my wife needed to walk it in her own way, her own pace. My daughter needed to. And maybe only with hindsight, I'm able to look back on that. At the time, I don't know if I fully understood that. But we started off on our own adventure, and we continue to. But that day, December the 7th, 2021, will be forever etched in my heart.
It's it was a severe blow. It would have been for anybody, but you had been hugely successful. You had a successful career in theatre. You were in all the big shows, and then you were a very successful coach, motivational speaker. You were really flying high, and then
it felt that way, and I you know, the book is about our relationship with ascent and the culture we live in that encourages and celebrates ascent and up and more and bigger and better and brighter and faster. And I was swept along with that. That was very in my familial system. My dad lived that way, grew his own business. And so I grew up with ascent. I grew up being encouraged to fly higher and fly faster and be better. But not at any point was I ever taught about my relationship to descent, my relationship to what happens when our kite plummets and when we go into free fall. I was never taught how to deal with that. And you know, I'd experienced a lot of descent in my life up to the point that I got the diagnosis. But as so often is the case, I was never encouraged to sit amongst the descent. I never said, actually, you need to be in it, you need to be with it, you need to build a relationship with it, you need to understand and mine for the wisdom and the treasure in there. I was encouraged to get out of it as quickly as possible and ascend again. Find the positive and ascend. And that's what I'd done. And it felt like this diagnosis that literally brought me to my knees and brought my own mortality right into sharp focus. There was no swerving. There was no quick fix to go, how do I just ascend again?
How do you cope with that?
I mean, and maybe the way people cope with it, especially around cancer, is to have that kind of fight it, the fuck it attitude, you know, fuck cancer. And there is a lot of that energy around illness, and that sense of we have to beat it, and that was never. And maybe for some people that is the ascent. How do I ascend as quickly as possible by kind of trampling on the cancer, beating it into a pulp, and kind of grabbing hold of the kite tails and flying again? I didn't feel that was what I wanted to do. I felt like I needed to be. I had been brought to my knees, and this was not going to be a quick fix. I had months of chemotherapy ahead of me. I knew I had a stem cell transplant ahead of me. So this was no quick fix. So faced with that choice of, which felt quite binary, of do I get into that fight it mode and push through and attempt to kick cancer's ass, or do I find a way to be in it and to swirl around in it and to roll around in it and to make some sense of its purpose. And I believe there was a purpose. And no will to find out what that was at the point of diagnosis. But I believe there was a purpose for all of us, actually, for Kelly, for my daughter. There was a purpose. There was a purpose for it.
Kelly's your wife, of course.
Kelly's my wife, yeah.
And did you feel, I know that you're very much somebody who's now talking about male mental health for men. Did you feel that as a man, this was particularly difficult for you to be with this, this new person who was in full flight descent? Because as a man, you're expected to be that fighter, that person who just goes out there and wins.
Yeah, I talked, a lot of my work before being ill was certainly around, as a therapist, around mental health and depression and anxiety and the risk we run of pathologizing all mental health and all crises that we have in our life. And I guess I was brought up in a patriarchal system that did, my dad especially had a bit of a tough it out energy, a bit of a kind of grow a pair, you just kind of get on with it attitude. He had one day off ill in his entire career because he'd had his appendix out the day before. But other than that, I mean, he never took a day off. So I had grown up with that, and yet I've always wrestled with. I never felt I fitted in with an alpha male group of men. I've never actually known very well how to be around men. If I'm faced with a group of men, generally I'm unsure how to enter that group of men. I don't do football. I don't do particularly blokey things. So I'm like, well, what do I talk about? I don't generally enjoy the company of men because I just think I'm not quite sure how to bring all of myself to it. I always grew up with this urge to sing and perform and be a part of theatre. And I have naturally quite, if you think of it in terms of Eastern traditions of Shakti and Shiva energy, I think I have quite a lot of feminine energy. And probably what I've had to work at is developing my mature masculine qualities, understanding what that means, and kind of thinking about how I bring them to bear. So I guess there was I think there was a hope from people around me that I would react in a way that was kind of tough it out, because that was going to be easier for them. If I toughed it out, they could tough it out alongside me. But I didn't do that. I went for, my world collapsed, and as a result of that, every shred was torn open. I felt enormously vulnerable and naked and exposed. And therefore, those who were going to go on this journey with us also needed to find a way to be okay with that. I lost friends along the way after the diagnosis. I had people that I've never heard from again. I had people that reappeared in my life. I had people who were unable to stay the course. And all of that is okay. None of those are bad things. They just are. But I know that some people wanted me to tough it out, wanted me to be like a real man, whatever that odd expression is and means, about it. And I don't think that's in my nature. I don't think it's in my nature. I think I might have pretended to do a bit of toughing stuff out in my life. But I think that's cost me, because I think what I ended up doing was denying things, repressing, suppressing, taking stuff and basically pushing it down to the very bottom of my rucksack. I would carry this metaphorical rucksack around with me, and I would push it right down to the bottom, which meant I didn't need to look at it, but it did mean that I carried it with me every day. And that's a heavy load for us. And I guess many of us do it. Right? We have our metaphorical rucksack. Some we feel able to take out and go, I'm going to deal with this thing today. I'm going to look at it closely, and I'm going to make some sense of it, and I'm going to do something with it. The rest, we tuck it away because it just feels too big, or it feels too overwhelming. And I've done that for a lot of my life. I tucked it away, but then I had to carry it. There's still that load that we have to bear. And it stops us from being light. And it felt like it stopped me from being joyful, stopped me from being as creative as I wanted to be. It made me quite dense and heavy and frustrated. So this kind of breaking down, this, in the book I talk about my illness in a way of using seasons and seasonality to describe some of it. And this was, I got the diagnosis in a winter, and this was my wintering. This was my shedding. Everything was stripped from the trees. I was naked. I was exposed. And I had no choice really but to live through that season. We can't get into winter and just kind of dress it up and warm it up and stick the leaves back on the trees. We have to go through winter to get to spring, to get to new growth. Right? And I had to trust that. I had to trust that I needed to go through this period of wintering. I mean, literally, I lost a lot of weight during the chemotherapy. I lost all of my hair, and as it started to grow back, I then had a transplant, which meant I lost all my hair again. I lost everything, lost my eyebrows. And so I was literally stripped back, physiologically stripped back, but emotionally and psychologically stripped back as well.
And so, and I love the metaphor of seasons that you use throughout the book, and also the punctuation with the haiku that you use, which is just beautiful. But in that stripped bare place where you were so vulnerable, there was obviously some kind of strength that came through. And a lot of people talk about the strength in vulnerability. So were you conscious of that? Was that something that helped you through? And there are other things that maybe we can talk about as well, but was that one of them?
I don't know. Yeah, there was. I don't know if I didn't feel very conscious. I felt like, I was 49 when I got this diagnosis, and I felt like I had spent 49 years of my life being in service. And I grew up in a household that felt quite unhappy. It felt like I had quite an unhappy energy and a dissatisfied and disillusioned energy. And I, as a child, decided that I needed to be the joy bringer. And I did that by helping my mother a lot, to the point of, again, it cost me, I think. I would at 8 years old wait at the window for her to come back from the shops. I'd have 2 cups ready with tea bags in and the kettle ready to go. I'd be waiting for her. The moment she'd come up, I'd be at the back door. I'd be carrying the shopping in. The kettle would be boiled. I'd be making her tea. I lived this life of appeasing my mother and being the one that would bring joy to her. And here I was at 49, having spent much of my life in service through theatre, through coaching, through workshops, through therapeutic interventions. And I was here having to find a way to be of service to myself. And I didn't really know how to do that. I didn't know how to serve self. I didn't know what that meant. I probably had always thought of it as being quite a selfish quality when we talk about self-serving. But for me, it was about finding a balance of how do I remain in service to the world. But at this point, there is a desperate need, literally a life and death need to serve myself. So I guess that brought up a lot of different qualities. perhaps some that I hadn't really utilized much in my life. And I guess strength was one. Will was certainly a quality of. I think will is broken into different qualities. I think we often talk about will as strong will, and that's maybe the alpha male bit, the toughing it out, the patriarchal kind of strong will, push on, find a way, keep pushing till you get through. There are other qualities of will that we think about less. Goodwill is one. But I think the quality of will that we talk about least is a quality of skillful will, which is the clever ways in which we are able to navigate the path that we are on, that we do it with discernment, and we do it with intelligence, and we do it with thought, and we do it with consideration. And I think that quality is utilized less. So I needed to bring will to bear. There were lots of days where I didn't want to take my tablets. I did not want to go back to the hospital to be an inpatient for 3 days and have more toxins pumped into my body. I did not want that. But one of the words that people used to describe the way Kelly and I walked the path was about walking it with grace and grit. And grit was that kind of the quality that said, we will do all that we can to find our best way to be with it and to move through it. And grace was that quality of more how we moved through it, and humility to it, and I guess a way to find an acceptance of what was happening. And acceptance, sometimes people thought as, oh, good, you're kind of giving up, you're rolling on your back with your feet in the air going, poor me. And acceptance is about that, the part of us that will welcome it in. And we did our best to welcome cancer in. I mean, cancer was hammering at our door. And we could barricade or we could welcome it in, and it was in my body already, so we might as well go, okay, come in, take a seat at the table, let's kind of figure this thing out between us. And I guess that takes some strength, I suppose. It takes some conviction, and it takes some bravery, because we were going into an adventure that was unknown to. Well, certainly very unknown to me. Kelly had walked alongside a lot of people who had lived with cancer, but for me, it felt very unknown, and I was very frightened. I was very frightened of leaving a wife and leaving a daughter and not being there for either of them. And days where I felt like I literally had no strength.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I had an enormous amount of belief. But I guess we muster up something. I think my lowest point, I remember sitting on the edge of the bed. It was a Wednesday, and I had to go to the hospital to have my PICC line cleaned and some medication. And I had taken my tablets. I take my tablets generally. I'm happy to take a handful of tablets, 10 tablets, and just chuck them in. And here I was with 20 steroids to take and a load of other different painkillers. And I felt so sick. I had to take one at a time, place one in my mouth, get the glass, have the sip of water. And I knew that this all needed to be done in order to get to hospital. And I just remember I was thinking actually of Kelly and Mia, and so wanting to have more experiences with them both. I felt like it was something wrapped and entangled with that yearning that got me up on my feet and got me in the car and back to that hospital again. But I remember it being the darkest point where if someone had said, 20 pills or this one pill, and this one pill means that game over, I I would have been very close to taking the one pill because I just felt like it. I was not going to be able to muster up enough to carry myself through.
Yeah, but you did have
I
the
did.
desire. Yeah, you had that desire to move forward and get yourself out of it. But you didn't do it alone. You did it with the community around you, not just
Yeah,
your
we did.
wife,
Yeah.
Kelly, and your daughter Mia, but you had such a huge community around you, not least the people who were treating you, the oncologists and everybody else in the health service who were helping you. And you're in remission now. And
Yeah.
you, as we've said, you talk about seasons. And you talked about at one point the strawberry moon. This show is going out on the strawberry moon of 2024, which I think was a lovely coincidence. But you know, as well as the community around you, you also found solace in nature. That was a hugely important thing for you as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, it still is. And when I was a city boy, I felt like my heart was in London. I always had done. I went to London, and whenever I went to London, I kind of grew. Felt like I grew in stature and presence, and London was my patch, and London Theatreland was my patch. And suddenly, London, we at that time lived just on the edges of London, and I have always felt like I would never really leave. I at least needed to be able to straddle visiting nature and being very quickly in a city and a town and theatre and restaurants and buzz. And something happened during my treatment. I think it felt like I was so stripped back to soul. I kind of made this journey home, this journey back to my true essence, and therefore whilst I would say I've always been a sensitive soul, I have become more sensitive, and I've become more sensitive physiologically. So one of the platinum-based drugs I took has massively affected my hearing. I've got quite significant hearing loss. Certain frequencies are completely wiped out. I have a tinnitus, which I'd always thought was a bit of a joke condition, really. I'd kind of probably sniggered at people with tinnitus, going, made up, kind of noise in your ears thing. But the tinnitus is significant. And I went into London a few times after my transplant, and it was just unbearable, JJ. It was, I would walk down the streets and the sounds would slice me up into tiny pieces. It just felt a complete assault. And I would get home way up the joy of being sat in a theatre versus all that I needed to get through. And my immunity is pretty rock bottom. It will always be compromised. So going into London, sitting on a train is quite a big deal. And actually, if I'm not enjoying it, then it's an even bigger deal, because I'm not only putting my own health at risk, it is less enjoyable. So we made this choice to make a move from London out to Wiltshire and to buy a small holding and live with animals and live quieter life. And I have never felt so settled and soothed as I do now. I mean, we talk about nature being a healer, and it really is. And I think we're only just starting to learn and see the science of that, and the science of how nature and green spaces and our connection with Mother Earth and our connection with plants and greenery and the air that we breathe, the impact that has on our physiological health and our psychological health. I mean, enormous studies done into the impact, especially on our mental health. And I, for the first time in my life, am feeling that. And I feel the pull to it. And if I spend a day in a town, it exhausts me, and I am desperate to get back to our garden and to park myself on our bench, or to go and sit with our chickens. And you know what? There is also a part of me that feels like I've run away, and I'm very fortunate as a therapist. I have a need to continue having therapy, and I'm grateful for that, because it gives me an opportunity to kind of unravel some of this stuff that I'm a little bit baffled by. And I often think about, am I running away from the noise, where actually there's a lot of work to do in cities, especially, and for the people who live there, and for the people who don't have access to, say, green spaces, or they don't have access to a community, then they don't have access to a place that is safe and where they are firmly held. And there's a little bit of me that feels like a deserter. I've kind of gone, oh well, you figure it out. I'm going here to live in a field, and I wrestle a bit with that. And Kelly runs a homeless charity, and so I still feel like I need to build my connection with helping people who are in a constant state of dissent. And I feel like I still need to bring presence to them, and some of the healing that I've been gifted and offered and found myself, but I still need to bring some of that to them. And that was a part of the reason we set up a charity. We set up a blood cancer charity 2 weeks after being diagnosed. And a part of moving here into the countryside was about, how can we give back some of the healing that I have been gifted? How can we give that back to others who are living with cancer, families who are living with cancer, families who have young children living with blood cancer? So we definitely, a part of living here is about, how do we help others also heal their own lives, and help communities heal through what we learn here, through what we bring to the countryside here, to what we gain, and the richness that we get from the countryside ourselves. But nature is vital, and I notice that the speed at which my nervous system settles when I am out in the garden, or when I walk the dog across the fields, and I get the awe of spaciousness around me, and what my body feels as if it is able to soak up. I feel better, and I feel better in my mind, and I feel better in my heart, and I feel better in my body.
And that's quite something, considering that you're still being treated, and you still feel pretty awful sometimes, I'm sure.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I have days that I have a lot of and a lot of people go, well, don't you look well? And look at your full head of hair, and
yeah,
and they're like, you can't have cancer, and I'm like, well, I have this incurable cancer, and the visit to the outside world, I look pretty well, and I guess it's only me that lays down at night and listens to my tinnitus, and notices the neuropathy in my feet, and notices the discomfort in my gut. I have to check on a daily basis. This cancer has a high propensity for relapse, and I have to check. It was discovered in my lymph nodes, and I have to check my lymph nodes, and I have to check daily. And I'm kind of living that routine now of going, what if? And nature soothes me. So I can only, we put off a lot of things, don't we? And I think Kelly and I probably would have moved out to the countryside at some point, but it wasn't on our radar for that soon. And this has brought in a much sharper focus, I think, of how we understand what our life needs more of, and how do we bring it to ourselves in the best way possible at the point that we notice it, rather than deferring it and always having a reason that we can't do it now, or it has to wait because. And I don't feel like I have that luxury. Whilst I haven't gone into I must do everything I can in my life because I don't know when I'm going to die. I haven't. That pace is too much for me. But this has been an enormous life move for us, and I feel like my healing and recovery has progressed in undescribable ways since we've moved.
I'm sure it has. And we haven't gone into massive detail when it comes to what you have gone through over the past few years. It's all in the book. But I love the way you have described what was going on for you, but in a very lyrical and beautiful way. It's, you're telling us about awful things, but in a way that is very personable, and where we can empathize and understand. And it is, I think, true that we are so focused in our modern age on the ascent and praising people who are doing well, praising people who are achieving their goals. And I've been as guilty as anyone of encouraging people to, be their best and, do their best and achieve what they want to achieve. But actually, we would do well to think more about the people who are on the way down into something which is not necessarily of their making. And, I think compassion is important these days. And you have shown that through your book hugely. And I love the way that you're working with that now.
We never know what other people are living through. I think we judge a lot. It's easy to, because we don't understand. But I think we just never, I sat in chemo suites and I look around and I look at people who look like they're in a much poorer quality of health than I am, or than I even when I was at my worst. And I still acknowledge that I have no understanding what their journey is like. I can do my best imagining, but I do think we have an enormous shortage of compassion and compassion for others, and just an opening up to wondering what other people are living with and being curious about that. And even more so now, we're going through enormous descent. We're about to have a UK election. We've got, I seen news items last week of 12-year-olds being found guilty of murdering by knife a 19-year-old man in this country. And we've got politicians talking about reducing taxes or increasing taxes. No one's talking about our society. No one's talking about the poor quality of health that people are living with. No one's talking about our boys, especially. There is a bit more emphasis on our girls than there has been. But what about our boys? How have we got to this place where 12-year-olds are committing acts like this? So there is a lot of work for us to do, but we're going through enormous collapse of systems. Educational systems, our healthcare systems are broken, they're damaged. People are working in environments which are dangerous and unsafe and relentless. And we need to be, as much as we can muster, enormously compassionate. And I wrote a book in 2015 called Jolt, which was all about the premise of this book which is like the irony in my life. The premise of this book was, good enough is no longer good enough. That was kind of the tagline of this book. And it was about how organizations and us as individuals, we needed to be disrupting our behavior. We needed to be making an intervention before the universe made an intervention for us and disrupted our own life. I mean, you couldn't make it up, really, that I wrote this book.
Great irony.
And here I am now talking about a book and an idea in my life that is about good enough is enough. We have to be okay with good enough. Donald Winnicott said it, about parenting, about being the good enough parent. And he said, in any expectation beyond being the good enough parent is that we create enormous risk for the mother if we have an expectation that anything beyond good enough is suddenly not okay. And I am hunting out good enough in my life. I'm deciding when I cook dinner what is good enough. I'm deciding how I look. Do I look? Is it good enough? Mm-hmm. About how I feel on a day-to-day basis, about getting to 8 o'clock at night and going, I haven't achieved 100 things, but actually what I have done has had quality about it, has had presence, has had attention, and a lot of people need a lot of compassion and understanding and presence, because there are enormous numbers of people in free fall and experiencing crashing and crushing descent, not just through ill health, but through relationship breakdown or financial collapse, losing jobs, being isolated, being alone. We just and then we have 12-year-old boys that have an intention to murder someone, and we have to go, where have we gone so wrong? And we have to learn from what we have done wrong, and we have to start thinking about how we repair some of what is fractured. And this is not a short-term fix. This is not how do we quickly ascend. We have to learn from this descent that we are in. And I think that's a mighty big ask for people. For all of us, it's a mighty big ask.
I agree with you, yeah. But I also agree that we do have to learn and get ourselves out of it somehow. And we are coming to the end. I could talk to you all day about this, but what I want to do is thank you for modeling how we can deal with some of the worst things that life can throw at us so gracefully, and be moved to reach out to help other people. And so I do recommend that anybody would read As a Kite Falls. And you talk about, I mean, what's happened to you has been awful, but in reading it, I don't feel down at all, because you handle the whole thing so beautifully and so lyrically. And you're a great storyteller, I have to say. Or that is your story to tell and nobody else's. So thank you so much for that. And thank you for talking to me today. Now, the book is out on the 29th of June, 2024. You're still working, but I mean, hopefully you're not doing too much. You're not pushing yourself too hard as a therapist. If people want to find out more about you, can they follow you on social media? Do you have a website? Where can people find out more?
Yeah, there's well, I'm on Instagram sporadically. I don't do very well on Instagram, but they can find me on Facebook, and they can find. I think I'm pretty findable, and the Willow Tree Foundation is the blood cancer charity that we set up.
I was going to ask you about that. Yeah.
People can. We have a group on Facebook, and we have a website, and people can find out there, and that's at thewillowtreefoundation.com. And so I think I'm pretty easy to track down, but I am doing little bits of work, and it's hard because I feel a bit unreliable at the moment. I still have some treatment, and some days are good and some days are less good. So I certainly don't work in the way that I used to work, which has been an important lesson in this.
Yeah, understandably. And so just on a final note, if you were to deliver one message as a result of your experience and your descent to anybody going through similar, not necessarily cancer, but, you know, so many things can cause us to spiral downwards, what would your message be?
I think it would be, we touched on community. It would be brave enough to do it with others.
Yeah.
And that probably means asking for help. I've shied away from asking for help for my entire life because I can do it myself and I don't want to put upon others. But actually, this forced our hand to ask for help. We had to ask for a lot of help. We had to ask for financial help. We had to ask for support to look after Mia, to look after our dog, emotional support, spiritual support and healing, people coming to bring food to us so that we could come back from hospital and eat something. But I've had to get over that, and I still find it hard. But speak up and speak out, and there will always be someone. There are enormous numbers of people who are wanting to help and will help. And I think that's what we were surprised by, that people will go, yeah, for sure. And we have a group of people who are our kin, I guess. Maybe it's about find your kin. Find your kin, find those people who will walk it with you. And they are there, but sometimes we have to ask for them, and we have to ask for them to step in because they just don't know, because we are so used perhaps to toughing it out and being seen as the one who can cope. And maybe we have to dare to shed that, or to dare to loosen it a little bit. The tight grip that it can have on us of being everything and doing everything for all people is that we just need to loosen that outfit a little bit. Maybe we don't need to strip off and run naked down the street, but if we just loosen some buttons,
I love it.
It makes it a bit easier to ask for help.
I love that. It's very difficult for a lot of us. Been through that one myself. But no, great advice there. Well, Richard Tyler, thank you so much for joining me today. And, you know, I hope that everybody watching, or at least some people watching, have found something in this conversation that really helps you. And please do remember to like and subscribe and share this video with everybody you know who may be on the descent and maybe needs some support and just a little bit of a helping hand to see them through whatever they have to do. But for now, thank you so much for watching, and thank you to Richard again for this really beautiful conversation, I felt. And I will see you, all my viewers, another time. But for now, goodbye.
JJ,
and thanks for watching. Thank you.